I think there's a shift underway, even if it's subtle. I'm not trying to overpromise. The authoritarian populist kleptocrat axis is running into limits, and it's beginning to bounce back. So, point number one, Ukraine is gaining steam. Now, I did a whole 5-minute video on this. The link is in my Substack. You can go to Worth Knowing YouTube and see the whole thing. I made the case that Trump and J.D. Vance have hoisted themselves on the ultimate petard of irony. By trying to undermine Ukraine and bolster Russia at every turn, they've inadvertently sparked a giant leap forward in European strength and cohesion and a wave of Ukrainian innovation that truly could help them to win this war. By the same token, there are signs that Europe is beginning to find its strength. There's a newfound sense of purpose in Europe now that they've kicked Viktor Orban to the curb and removed his veto over European aid to Ukraine. They've pulled together and are on the verge of sending a massive aid package, loan package to Ukraine. And what we're seeing is growing cohesion around standing up to Trump as the US has backed away from the NATO alliance. European countries have tried to fill the gap. And again, there's irony here. I almost sound like I'm giving Donald Trump credit, but there's no doubt that if this trend continues, it'll be because of what Trump did, whether it was fully intended or not. But Europe does seem to be closing that gap. In Russia, Politico just reported last night on signs of cracks and strains and of the Kremlin going through one of its periodic bouts of infighting and house cleaning. Or as Ukrainian intelligence officials like to put it, this is a great quote, spiders eating each other in a jar. High-level government officials are being scapegoated and prosecuted. Russia's whole Victory Day parade was scaled back to a minimum level because of fears of Ukrainian drone attacks. And again, this is a quote from Politico. On the economic and social fronts, the Kremlin also has worries. The patriotic consensus inside Russia is beginning to face growing pressure from worsening living conditions, expanding drone attacks, and rising social fatigue. In China, you don't hear much about this. Certainly didn't hear much about it in the run-up to that Putin Putin. There you go, Putin on the brain, to that summit between Trump and Xi last week. Didn't hear much about it. But there are growing signs of economic unrest in China, economic protest in China, where it's so dangerous to protest, which shows that this is very meaningful to the people who are engaging in it. Freedom House has reported increasing dissent over labor and, quote, a steady rise in protests by homebuyers and homeowners amid a deepening financial crisis in China's real estate sector. Other analysts have even documented an uptick in violent attacks, revenge on society attacks, people frustrated, angry, and lashing out. And maybe the biggest story coming out of the Trump-Xi summit last week was that there was no story. There were no real deals, no trade progress, nothing that fundamentally moves the needle on the economic status quo for either country. And again, I'm going to get into this with Dan because it begs a lot of questions there. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's ruling coalition, led by Netanyahu, has just gotten out ahead of what was going to be opposition calls to dissolve parliament and hold early elections. They had to, because Netanyahu is facing, according to The Guardian, quote, a possible collapse of his fractious coalition as he comes under mounting pressure from ultra-Orthodox parties. So he's got deep political problems. By the way, he's 76 years old and underwent treatment for prostate cancer. He has a number of pressing issues. But if you were to make the case right now that his grip was slipping, you'd be on pretty firm ground. Finally, let's talk domestically, which is usually where we focus here. Donald Trump is breaking the floor. If you remember nothing else from today's live stream, it's this. We have stunning numbers coming in this week about just how far Trump has fallen. Now, there's been a long-running assumption among American political analysts for years that there's a lower limit on how far Trump can sink in the public's estimation. You see it in his approval numbers. Seems to be about a 38% to 40% floor on his approval rating. Well, he's falling through it. The new numbers, which I'll show more of when we get Dan on here in a couple of minutes, the new numbers from the New York Times from their polling are really breathtaking, just how far he's fallen. The most breathtaking of all, I've been making a case on this live stream, on my Substack for weeks, that the fundamentals of the political situation have not changed. As bad as the Voting Rights Act ruling was from the Supreme Court, as bad as the overturning of Virginia's map was as a setback for Democrats in the midterms, they were bad. They were roadblocks. They were stumbles. Doesn't change the fundamentals. And when I was writing about that, the fundamentals were saying that the generic ballot was about a 7-point advantage for Democrats. That's very strong territory, very strong territory. Like Republicans in 2010, Obama shellacking territory, that much of an advantage. The New York Times Siena poll just showed that it's actually now an 11-point gap. 11 points. That is 2018. That is up there with some of the biggest midterm wave elections ever. That's the territory we're getting into. And what seems to be driving it is prices, affordability, cost of living, that whole nexus of issues, and also a realization from the public that this is all an empty bag of nothing from Trump, that they essentially prayed for a Hail Mary in 2024, and their prayer wasn't answered. It turned out to be nothing but a bag of air from this guy, and all they've gotten is a bunch of fake Trump phones and promises of an economic golden age that aren't true. And Trump literally saying, you don't even think a little bit about Americans' financial situation, about Americans' financial pain, that you don't worry about it at all. And now we have here Dan Perry. Dan is the former lead editor for Europe, for the Middle East, the Associated Press, leading coverage and editorial responsibilities in many other places around the world. And there's really no greater expert on the kinds of questions that we're trying to run through today than Dan. So I just want to ask you right off the top, understanding my contention that something has shifted, that the authoritarian, kleptocratic, faux populist ascendancy has hit a wall recently. Give me your top line answer. Do you agree with that?